I haven't been able to be as many practices the past week as far as the windows and that go, but there has been, I guess, some things of note. The last few days, Al Walcott was confirmed to be at the star spot. Christian Morgan just talked yesterday, and it sounds like he's kind of just a roving sort of backup player at every single spot, from the star to the free safety to the weak safety. That's kind of what was outlined by Christian himself yesterday, which we've kind of known that, but it was just interesting to hear from him. And he's sort of the veteran guy. So that was confirmed. That was one of the more recent things. Anything from Aranda over the weekend that you heard, or anything else you picked up on that was of note?
Yeah, I mean, the Walcott thing, we've pretty much known that since the first day of fall camp, him going out there and playing that position. He's also banged up, and so that's something to keep an eye on, but he should be back very, very soon. He's going to be a very impactful guy for this defense and really fits in nicely to the star spot. And I'm so intrigued by what they're going to do at cornerback, because for them to have the confidence to move the guy who, in my eyes, was their best cornerback a year ago, means they have some young guys they feel really, really good about. So that was definitely one thing of note. Christian Morgan kind of being the roving guy makes a lot of sense. And honestly, if you remember last year, Jaron McVay kind of did that. And I think Morgan is pretty much going to fit into that role of playing multiple safety spots and just knowing all of them and knowing how to play all of them and giving them a veteran leadership quality. He played the star in the spring. The boundary is what he played all last year. And the field spot, probably a little more difficult for him to play, but an area that I think if you're playing two high safeties, he would be just fine at. So I'm very curious to see how they end up utilizing him during the season, but I do think he's going to carve out a role and be on the field a lot for this Baylor team on the defensive side. Some news and nuggets in my eyes. So I think Seth Jones is a guy that needs to be brought up a little bit more, and probably one that I don't think we've talked about quite enough, or really anyone has talked about enough. He started in the spring game, and he's starting to emerge a little bit as a guy who might be contending to be inside the two deep, which I wouldn't have thought was going to be the case a couple weeks ago. He might be in that top 5-ish group for this wide receiving core on the outside. And so because of that, he's a big riser for me and a guy that's really, I think, turned some heads as fall camp has gone on. Now he's just going to have to continue to do that, keep stacking days. And if he does, there's a realistic outcome where he's the starting outside wide receiver for the first game of the year, along with Josh Cameron and Monterey Baldwin. So something to keep an eye on there. I would also say, I think after this last week, I think Richard Reese is the third running back for this Baylor team right now. That might be more of a guess than anything, but it just seems like he's had a really nice fall and is a guy who's continuing to move up the depth chart. And also, when I look at this running back group, he, to me, is the closest to being like Squirrel. And we've known, Squirrel, the injury history, we all kind of have known that. So they need another guy who kind of fits that mold of being quick, fast, and explosive through the hole, and he fits that extremely well. So you got Squirrel, you got Tay McWilliams, but I think he might be the third guy at this very moment.
So is that good news or bad news that a freshman's walking in as a third running back, and is that good news or bad news that Seth Jones is just out of nowhere emerging to be perhaps a starting wide receiver?
Yeah. I think for Seth, it's a little bit different because I think we kind of knew that this position was wide open. And honestly, we probably should have just read the writing on the wall when he was starting in the spring game. I mean, there were guys out. I understand all that, but also maybe I should have taken that more into consideration when I've been doing my thought process on this. And, you have a new wide receiver coach, so you have a new philosophy. And so you're going to have new guys that step up in the group and fit what Dallas Baker needs at wide receiver. It just seems like Seth has had a really nice, half of fall camp. Now, can he continue that? I don't know. Can he keep pushing for that? Who knows? They've had some guys out at the wide receiver position for various reasons, and so he's made the most of it, and he's stayed healthy. So I wouldn't say that one is a huge negative for anyone just because he was already the starter in the spring. So, maybe it is more so they don't want to start the freshman quite yet. They don't want to start Armani yet. Maybe that's the case. Or maybe just Seth is taking the position by storm. Running back is a little bit different. Richard Reese is actually old for his grade. I believe he's already 19 or 20. He's an older guy at the running back position as a recruit, which is not something you see very often, but it is something where you go, okay, so maybe he's more college ready. And I think just looking at Squirrel and looking at the rest of the guys on the depth chart at running back, there's no one that is really comparable to Squirrel or runs like Squirrel. Fleeks is a converted wide receiver. Quaylon Jones, bigger back. Jordan Jenkins, bigger back. Kyan Roberts-Day, bigger back. There's really no one that kind of matches that electric burst that Squirrel has. And so I think that's where Richard Reese has kind of separated himself from the rest of the running backs in just a different way. I think he just fits a different role than the other guys.
So that is of note, obviously, that you've got two guys who have not been talked about a lot that could be emerging to, get significant snaps and significant, I guess snaps is the best word because I don't want to go too far and start throwing stats out there and things like that. But
it's more like they have a role.
Yeah, significant roles coming up this season, which for Richard Reese, is great. I don't think anybody was really expecting him to come in right away and have too much of an impact. But for Seth Jones, I'd say it's a little bit more needed because he has been around for what seems like a little while now and hadn't appeared to have really carved out too much of a specific, slot. It was almost thought that you were afraid that he's going to get lost a little bit if we didn't hear something soon. So that's obviously a positive development for both of those young men. And we will obviously see here in a couple of weeks for sure. Those first games, at least that very first game in Albany in particular, definitely a game where you'd expect to see Seth Jones and Richard Reese and whoever else you want to throw into that mix getting some playing time. And beyond that, there's not a lot of games that you can really point to. So that will be interesting to see, how much they try to get out of that game.
Yeah, that one and hopefully Texas State. That one should be.
Unlike last year.
Yeah, it should be a blowout. It really should be. We'll see what happens there. A couple other notes personnel-wise. Offensive line with Khalil Keith out. You got Tate Williams and Gavin Byers kind of competing for the right tackle spot. They've been getting the most work there, but I still think there's a realistic situation that Elijah Ellis also fits into that role a little bit. I know he's been working as the backup left tackle behind Connor Galvin, but I do think there's a chance that he's their best right tackle guy as well, at least with Khalil out. So I'm very curious to see how that shakes out. I know Tate Williams has been really impressive, and he continues to grow and build upon his start to fall camp and what he did this spring, and he's gotten a lot better. And I think for that reason, I feel really comfortable going into these first three games, even without Khalil Keith. Now, you go beyond that, you go to at Iowa State and Oklahoma State. They're probably going to need Khalil for those games. I think whoever starts at right tackle could get overwhelmed a little bit. But I do feel okay about those first three games with the guys that are emerging on the offensive line. Moving on to the defensive side, the only name that I really want to bring up here is Matt Jones. It seems like he's going to be the will this year. It just seems like he's kind of taken that position by storm. Not really surprising. He's the veteran. He's the guy who I think everyone would have said to start the year it's probably going to be Matt Jones. But there's talent there. Will Williams, Josh White, and they're really, really good players, but they're also much younger. It just seems like Matt has really taken over that position, and I fully expect him to be the starter when the season begins.
So I know there's been some talk about where exactly he would be used and just kind of his role coming off of an injury, but I'm excited to see him. He's got to be one of the top players defensively. I almost feel like he could get a little bit lost in the shuffle at times as well.
Yeah, I think so too, and I also think people are forgetting, like you said, positional versatility. And if Baylor does run out two jack linebackers on the field at the same time, you could see him slide down, which would allow them to put in a Josh White or a Will Williams, or maybe in coverage, they bring in Will Williams to bring in kind of another de facto star onto the field as he's kind of more of a nickel back, his height and weight at least. And so I'm very curious by it, but Matt Jones is going to be on the field a ton and is going to be a huge playmaker for this defense. You're exactly right.
Yeah, no, he'll definitely have a massive role no matter where you find him on the field or where you find him blitzing or whatever he's doing, he's going to be an important key in what Ron Roberts and company are trying to accomplish. So, definitely got some eyes on Matt Jones as we get closer. And just as a whole, excited to see this football team. It's taken shape. It's kind of flown by already, this preseason camp. It just felt like it opened the other day, and I guess it technically did. But here we are, and they're going into their final week. So there will be, I think, 4 more open sessions. And then by Friday, I believe it's closed shop, and they will, again, go behind closed doors and start to go into game week mode. And that's when the party really starts, and we'll be, soon enough having post-game shows and the like. So